Well, as usual, the batteries died in my calipers again. This one lasted about a month from putting it in new. Do you own any of these cheap calipers and are tired of constantly replacing the button battery? Well, why don't you modify it to take a AA battery instead? This is one I did earlier. As you can see, there's a AA battery in a AA battery holder. It's hot glued to the back of the calipers. The wires, in this particular case, run through a little hole I've drilled in the back of the calipers to feed the wires. So it's just to keep it nice and neat. You don't have to do it that way. You can just take the cover off and just bend them around and solder them inside that way. This is my first one I did. I own about 4 of them now, and it's just an easy way of doing things. So all you're going to need is a AA battery holder like this, some wires on it, a hot glue gun and some hand tools. And it's a fairly easy modification to do. Okay, so what we're going to do now is take the battery out, and I'll explain a little of what we're going to be doing. We're going to be drilling a couple of holes here on that side, which we're going to feed these wires through. Once we've got the wires through, we're going to solder the red wire. The red wire is going to be soldered to that contact there. The black wire, I'll get it in shot, the black wire will be soldered to the contact down the bottom, right down there. Okay? So I'll trim them off and solder them to it, and then I will bend the wires around and hot glue the battery holder onto the back of the calipers. So the first thing we're going to do is drill a couple of holes for the wires. Now you can just see the 2 holes I've drilled there, which I'll feed each of the wires through. I'll then cut the wires, trim them, so they're just short enough to solder on. As I said at the beginning of the video, you don't have to do it that way. You could just trim off the excess of the wires and just solder them straight to there and tape it around the back. That is one way of doing it. It's up to you how you want to do it. I just find that that's probably the easiest way of doing it. Another thing I do sometimes, because you have a wire coming out of each end, it's not a big deal. You can just hot glue it like that so the 2 wires are together. That's one way of doing it. Sometimes what I have done in the past to make it look a bit neater is drill another hole here, thread one of the wires, like the black wire, back into the battery compartment and then out that little hole. So both the wires are then coming out in the same spot. That just makes it look a little bit neater. It's up to you. I think by the time I got to the 3rd one I didn't bother. I just sort of hot glued it onto the side because I just wanted to get it over and done with quickly. Okay? So I'm going to drill a little hole and thread the wires back through, and I'm going to get ready to start soldering them. So, a little hole about there. That's it. Wrong hole. Neil, try that again. That hole I want. There's a hole actually in the bottom of the battery compartment there, the battery holder. So now we have both the wires coming out of a very similar sort of place. That just makes it that little bit neater when you're trying to put the whole thing together. Okay? So that's what it will look like when it's finished. Okay? So I'm going to be tinning the wires next, and then we'll slip them into the calipers, and from there we'll solder them onto the contacts within the calipers. As I said, these strips of metal inside of the battery compartment. So we'll be soldering to those next. Yes, they'll stay still. That's better. Make sure we've got plenty on that. Keep knocking this thing around. Right. That's better. Okay, you can see that the moment soldering on. Changing glasses time so I can see what the hell I'm actually doing. So, you can see inside of there, you can see the little bit, you can see the bottom contact, so that's the negative, you can see the side one, that's the positive. What I like to do, you don't have to do, is I quite often will bend the positive one around just to make it a bit easier to get to. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do, unwind the solder, and I'm going to try and solder inside the compartment. Okay, so there's the first little piece of solder on the negative contact. Now we'll do the positive one. Which is not taking as well as the other one did. Might have needed to put some of the old baker's flux on it, I think. There we go, finally it's taken. Right, so the next is we feed the wires through. Might do them one at a time just to make my life a little bit easier, so I'm not having to push and pull things around quite so much. This is where it's a bit tricky, because you've got to be able to hold it and solder it, and because the things don't weigh that much, they keep trying to jump away from me. Right, so that's one done. It's a bit hard for you to see. Okay, so now you can see that the red wire is actually attached. Next will be the black wire, so push that through a bit further. Right, so that's the negative wire attached. Now, to see whether it's actually working, I'm going to put a AA battery into that one, which of course I don't have a spare one floating around, so I'll just steal it out of this one for the time being. Okay, so here's a AA battery into there, and voila, it's working. So the next thing to do is to actually hot glue it onto the back, put a bit of tape over the wires, the cover in, and it's done. So okay, I slightly damaged, I think, the... Right, there you go, they do go on. So there you go, it's pretty well finished. You can see the general idea of how it works. So say a little bit of tape or a little bit of hot glue on there, and that is completed. Okay, so there we have it, one completed version of it. So, scene 2, take 1, and we're recording this time.